Greetings, this is the Policy and Services Committee, starting slightly late. We were due at 6, it's going on 6:20, so thank you for being so patient, and we will move this along relatively quickly. I'd like to suggest that we take number 1, make it number 2, so that we can go to number 2, since we have a group here who is going to talk about the $30,000 and how we will spend that. And I think that's you, am I correct? Oh, no, I'm sorry. No. You're not the right one. That's okay. Just stay. It's fine. But I need to know who from staff is going to, oh, it's Rob. Come on over. Come on over. I should have known. So, my understanding is there has been some activity with teens around this issue, and let me just read into the mic so that people who are hopefully watching will know what we're talking about. This is number 2, and I should have let you call the roll first. I apologize.
It's okay. Councilmember Holman?
She's here.
Karen?
Holman? I'm sorry. Councilmember Klein?
Here.
Chair Niss?
I'm here.
Councilmember Price? Here. 4 present.
Are you on now? How come
Oh,
Oh, okay.
right. So, greetings, as I said, and we are on, so I'm going to continue reading this. So for anybody watching at home, we're switching the agenda, and we will put number 2 as number 1 tonight so that we can get to our visitors right away. This says recommend the expenditure of up to $30,000 from the net revenue collected from 455 Bryant, of which 75% is committed to teen programs, to hire an hourly staff person to develop and maintain a calendar of events, programs, and services for the teens, and develop and implement an evening drop-in program for the high school students at the new Mitchell Park Library and Community Center. It says only Palo Alto High School students, so I'm going to presume it's Pally and Gunn. Yes. Good. So, thank you for being here tonight. It's nice to see you, and I know you'll be introducing those who came with you.
So, good evening, council members. Rob the Ghost, Community Services Department. I would like to introduce the students as they join us tonight. I thought it'd be nice for you to talk directly to some students, and they've been working with us on trying to figure out how to best spend these funds. So, we have Fabian Carvino over here. He's one of the leaders of the Teen Arts Council out of the Children's Theatre. Jessica Feinberg here. She's a leader in the Project Safety Net work that we do. We do lots of different things with Project Safety Net, as you know. We have Max, I'm going to mess up your name, Kruzovic. Kravchuk. You're going to mess that up. He's a member. He's a leader in our Palo Alto Youth Council. And then we have Riley Burt over there at the end, who's a leader also in the Teen Arts Council out of the Children's Theatre. So we have 2 recommendations before you this evening, but before we get to those, I thought I'd just have a few remarks about the background of why this is before you and the outreach process that we've done so far and some of the early insights that we've discovered through some of that outreach. So by way of background, in 2003, a deal of sorts was struck between the then Youth Council and the City Council to no longer have a teen center in downtown Palo Alto, in favor of net revenue that the old teen center property might generate through leasing that space. The net revenue was intended to be used for teen programs and services. However, it took several years for that lease to actually generate any net revenue, but it finally did start generating some revenue in, I think, 2009, and up to today, it's generated about $217,000, which sits in a fund ready to be spent. And we expect the lease to generate about $75,000 in revenues annually after that. Maybe that'll grow a little bit as rents go up. What staff has done to try and prepare for the presentation here, obviously the City Council referred this to the Policy and Services Committee. We assembled a team of people from the Library Department and Community Services Department to help work on how we might recommend some funding on this topic. And I want to recognize a few staff members, actually, if I could. Jennifer Marsh from the Palo Alto Arts Center, Jessica Lewis, who I think is in the audience. Jessica, can you wave? From Recreation Services. Mary Ann Young from Libraries.
If you're here, just wave your hand.
Yeah. Team and Zoo, Marika Gabari from Children's Theatre, and Lane Pianta from the Children's Theatre. And Lane is here too, back there. And so we sort of got together and we looked at the Palo Alto Youth Master Plan, which sort of describes a little bit about this issue of giving up the teen center and having some money and how to spend it. And it was really clear in there that whatever we decide to do with the money has to be very much teen-driven, and not only in the recommendation, but the programs that we decide to actually fund. So that's what we've been working on for the last couple of months, 3 months. We're doing several things. We did a large teen survey, which we'll talk about tonight. We did a focus group with teens. These guys will talk a little bit about that. We're also doing interviews with our youth-serving agencies and partners to hear what they're learning and seeing in the community in terms of gaps. And we're doing a best practice review across the peninsula and the country about what's really working for teen programs. So with regard to the teen survey, just a few facts. We have 531 responses to date, and we'll gather responses through the end of November. 40% of the responses are from Gun High School, 30% from Palo Alto High School, 20% from our middle schools, 3 middle schools. About 61% are female responses, 40% are male. And the big question that we asked was, where do you see the gaps in services and programs, and where would you spend the money? And it was pretty interesting to hear some of the results. And I'll just start talking about this a little bit, and then I'll have these guys chime in as to what they heard. So one of the big sort of insights from the survey that came up a lot was that students, particularly high school students, are not so much interested in more structured, organized programs. And in fact, one of the questions on the survey, which was in the staff report, is, what do you already participate in? And there's like 10 pages of activities. There's so many clubs and programs that it's remarkable what the teens are doing. Which is terrific, but what there seems to be a sort of a lack of is just the low-key, unstructured, hangout, stress-free type of spaces. So that was a big takeaway. Anything related to sort of stress reducing was a big thing. Stress came up a lot. Academic stress in lives of teens was a big topic in the survey results. So any program that would help reduce that was big. Low-cost food was another big thing that kids brought up a lot, particularly around Gun High School, where there just isn't a lot of options. So low-cost, no-cost food, very, very important. Music and performing arts is something also that just kept coming up over and over in these survey results. Other highlights were outdoor activities, science and technology, and tutoring, interestingly, came up a lot. And tutoring with respect to Stanford students. I'd love to see a program where we had Stanford students come to one of our community centers or perhaps our schools and help with tutoring programs, as opposed to peer-to-peer tutoring, which is a lot of what the schools do right now. We also heard a lot of feedback about the schools themselves and school climate and some of the stresses that kids feel about the schools and how that could be improved. We didn't have a lot of control over that, of course, but we are giving all of this information over to the school district, and letting them use this information and try and interpret and see if it's helpful for them. So that were a few of the highlights. I'll ask these guys to chime in, and maybe Jessica, you can start, because I know Jessica took some time to put some things together in terms of highlights, and then you can share those.
Well, I was trying to read through the survey results, and there were around 500, so it was not. Okay. Thank you. I was reading through the survey results, and there were about 500, so it wasn't very easy to read through. So I just started writing down the things that I saw that came up more than once, specifically things that came up much more than once. And I just wrote those down, and then from there I organized them into different categories. so they're definitely arbitrary categories, but I think that they work somewhat to talk about the different areas that teens thought there was room for improvement.
And just to frame it up a little, I know you don't anticipate we're going to put a program together tonight.
Right.
So you're really telling us what's out there and what's of
Some
interest.
of the headlines and
But-
highlights, yeah.
But then, and what we will do is refer this to the full council
Right.
for that expenditure.
Right.
I don't want anyone to think we'll be suddenly coming up with an ideal teen program for Palo Alto.
No. So there was interest in semi-structured activities. One thing I noticed is that they wanted organized hiking trips. I know that there are a lot of hiking trails around Palo Alto, and I guess that students felt like it would be fun to take a trip with an organized group of students out there, because I think that is a slightly underutilized resource aside from the dish. And they also wanted activities that were more low commitment, so like a beginner's dance group, and low commitment classes like in dance and theater where you don't have to commit necessarily to doing a show, but you can still learn. And a lot of things came up about a low commitment cooking class, specifically I think seniors who are scared about going to college and not necessarily knowing how to cook cheap and easy and healthy meals. And then outdoorsmanship also came up a bit. And then also drama and musical opportunities, so like a children's theater group. A couple people mentioned that there is the children's theater, but that seems to be more directed at younger kids, and then teens are welcome to help out and sometimes star in shows, but it's not really teen directed. And then there are the Palo Alto Players, but that's an adult group. So teens felt that having a teen-specific children's theater group would be really helpful to, using the arts citywide. And there's also a lot of push for citywide arts opportunities, because students right now, you can really, aside from the children's theater, do a play or a musical with people from your school, and students wanted the chance to mix with students from other schools and draw in the Castillejo students and stuff like that. And then the unstructured activities are what you would probably expect. Non-competitive sports like drop-in soccer games, stuff like that. And then also, obviously, food-centric things, picnics, potlucks, grilling parties. And then in the upcoming teen center, they wanted something like a movie night where they could drop in, see the movie, hopefully with cheap food, of course, because I didn't bother to write that one down a lot because I thought it would be fairly obvious. And then they also wanted just general opportunities like a teen support center and a teen job center, so places where they could come and look for internships or jobs and that were directed at teens and open to teens, and like a good resource to find all of that. And they also just wanted places where they could be after like 6 p.m., especially in the winter when it gets dark. The parks are great, but they get very cold. And they get very dark, so they wanted well-lit open areas where teens could hang out and hopefully study with friends, so different areas. And so under places and opportunities, those two categories overlap a lot. Yeah, that's, I think, a good summary.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Riley, do you want to add a little something?
So I guess like my specialization here would be the arts, since I'm from Teen Arts Council. So I can kind of speak to the theater. So the thing about like the children's theater and how it works is there are plays that it's open to anyone from about 8 years old, I think, to 17 years old. So that can vary for anyone who's from a child to a teen. And then within the Teen Arts Council, we put on shows. Usually it's about one per year. And the thing about that is sometimes they can be more restricted depending on how much money we want to use. So definitely getting more funding just within the Teen Arts Council, we would have more opportunity to put on bigger productions or different events. So like we put probably our most successful event is our open mics, and that's definitely something that a lot of people, I think, kind of congregate around, and it's really kind of created a brand for the Teen Arts Council. And so going back to the $30,000, I think that calendar of events and that I guess central place for teens to look for something, I think that's really important because I think there really needs to be a lot of focus there, because kind of branding some sort of place where teens can go to look for something and trust that that place is going to tell them something fun that they can do on X night on X day is really important. And I think in order to make that successful, definitely funding needs to go to whatever that is. And I think having staff to handle that and kind of organize different, groups together, I think that would be a really great thing.
Thanks, Riley. Right, and Max, you want to add anything? Max is
Yeah.
Yanni's with the
I
Alto
have-
Youth Council.
Yeah, so I participated in the focus group as well as, how think about the survey. So I've had a bit of exposure to this. And I think that all these programs, and including Expanding the Arts, are all great ideas. But I think there's like a more fundamental problem, one that was sort of addressed in the agenda thing. And it's like that there's sort of this apathy with like programs in Palo Alto. Like most of the times teens aren't aware of many programs that are available to them. And I know this was the problem with the old teen center. Apparently it was mostly middle school students, and there weren't enough high school students that were coming to the teen center to facilitate to ensure that it was worth continuing. That's why there's renovation. And now I think we're trying to encourage high school attendance at this new teen center. So I think what needs to happen, in addition to all these new programs, is perhaps having more connections to local high schools and telling students that the teen center is a place for high school students, and that there are many cool things and many fun things for teens to do at these teen centers. I think that is as important as implementing some of these activities.
Right, thanks, Max. And Fabian, you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So I think the truth of the matter is we don't have any teen activities or events or anything specified, like specifically for teens. Like the only thing I can think about is like the Teen Arts Council and the Teen Youth Groups, which are like 2 or 3 things. And I feel like if we add events specified for teens and teens only, not like kids 9 to 17, but like teens like 13, like only high schoolers, I feel like that would be more successful, because as a high schooler I don't want to be with younger kids in a sense. I think something that would be successful would be the job like opportunity place, because I feel like there's a lot of jobs that teens can find like at like Cream or Pete's Coffee or lifeguarding, like typical jobs like that teens have. But I feel like if we have like just a small booth or center somewhere around the city where teens can go to find jobs that are more specified as something that they're passionate about, like an internship at a theater workshop or an art workshop or youth government or whatever, something that they're passionate about, I feel like it'd be more like teens would be more involved with that than if it was just normal like low-key jobs and internships. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Great. So that's sort of the teen survey. It's interesting with any survey. Sometimes we have more questions as a result of looking at the results. So we're still collecting the survey results over the month of December and January. We'll be doing more focus groups with students to try and interpret what the information is really telling us, and then hopefully some bigger ideas will emerge about how to spend sort of the larger portion of the funds, which will come back to this committee to talk about and hopefully get your approval for. I'd like to talk a little bit about the focus group, and then we'll be ready for questions and answers. But we also had this pretty engaging sort of focus group with several of these guys were here. We had about 30 high school teens, a few middle school kids as well, at the Lucy Stern Center. And there was sort of a 3-part exercise where we created this big map of Palo Alto that you could walk on and crawl over, and it had some, orientation, so some main streets, downtown, the 2 high schools, that type of thing. And then we had the students do 3 things. One, we asked them to create a vision of a really, teen-friendly community, one that they would really love to live in, and focus on the areas where there are gaps as far as they see it in this community. And so that was the first exercise that they talked and discussed and then drew on the map. And then the second part of the exercise was we had them fund the map. So we gave them all $450 in fake money, and then they actually stuck it on the map to say, this is where I would put money given all of these things. And then the final exercise was actually having them put themselves in the map. So they each got 3 dots that represented themselves and said, if this was these new things that were happening, this is where I would hang out. And so all in all, it was a pretty interesting exercise as well. What we experienced was sort of a clustering of activities around downtown, around the Lucy Stern Center, because it's such a hub of activity. You have the Arts Center there, the library, the Children's Theater, Junior Museum, got the pool, parks. There's just a lot going on right there. It's like this cultural center. So the teams were saying, well, how can we build on that already exists? And then the other cluster was around Mitchell Park, South Palo Alto. The big ideas, bowling alley came up a lot. We just want to see a bowling alley. We used to have a bowling alley, fairly inexpensive, I think, and fun. Again, inexpensive dining, low-cost food, big theme. Wi-Fi was another thing that came out of the focus group. Free Wi-Fi as many places as possible, and that would be great. Out of the focus group, we heard a lot about, and I need to understand this a little better, but transportation was difficult. At least these teams were saying just getting around town was hard if you didn't have a car. Was not convenient. And the cost of doing things was a barrier. And this actually came up in the survey a lot too. Like downtown, like being downtown, but you've got to spend money if you're downtown. There's very little places where you can just be and not spend money. So that was, and then work opportunities and internships came up a lot too. And then, when we asked where you would fund, where would they put most of their money, most of the funding seemed to go to South Palo Alto around Mitchell Park. Wi-Fi was number 2, bowling alley was number 3, and then 4 and 5 were arts, open art studio and music and recording studios, that type thing. And the last part was where would you put yourself? There was no surprises, these all sort of relate to each other. The bowling alley was where most people would be. Wherever there is Wi-Fi, wherever there is inexpensive food and dining, and music and sort of recording studio opportunities was very popular with this particular focus group. So that was really, it was fun. We gave everyone free frozen yogurt, and they really appreciated the student participation. It was very good. Those of you that were there, I don't know if you want to add anything. I know that Riley was there, and Max, were you there?
I was there, yeah.
Yeah, so do you want to add anything to it? Yeah.
I'm confused as
Yeah.
to what we're doing tonight.
Okay.
So I'm hearing lots of things that are way beyond what the agenda item is. For example, transportation.
Yeah.
That would be a big ticket item. And we're supposed to be talking about expenditure of up to $30,000 from net revenue, et cetera, for part-time teen workers. So and later on, discussion of all these potential programs and which ones we want to fund. So I'm glad to hear about all this, but I'm just wondering where we're going.
So let me try and put some context or frame around this. So this, in some ways, I see this as a sort of a check-in meeting about the bigger question: how to spend $217,000 and potentially $75,000, $80,000 a year going forward. We don't have an answer for how to do that yet, but we're working through this outreach to try and understand where it would be best to invest that type of funding. And so some of this information that we're sharing is to that bigger question, right? And so one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this tonight is so that we don't come back in February and it's a complete surprise as to, well, why would we be investing here? That you're hearing some of it now around food, transportation, and other things, even though we're not asking for funding for those things specifically now.
But as I read this here, this is to hire someone who will develop and maintain that. So right now you're doing a lot of what if or dreaming and so so forth about what,
Okay.
what could actually be.
If I might interject, I think that this hourly staff person, like, as you can see, there's such a diversity of events of what teens want. Like, there's everything from like transportation to like bowling alleys, right? Like, it's such a wide range, right? And there's no chance that we'll be able to implement them all. So I think that what Rob is trying to say here is that with all these activities, we need an hourly staff person in order to determine what we should prioritize over others and what's more important to the teens over others.
Right, well put. And as this says, also to maintain a calendar of events, programs, and services. So I'm going to presume that person will also identify those, in case
Well,
there are things going on that the rest of them don't know about.
the person that we would hire to help create the calendar, would be sort of creating sort of an online social media calendar, which is one place where Palo teams can go to see what is available. Because we know that awareness of what's available is a big gap. That's one of the things. But to the point about all of these things that we're hearing, there is a lot. And you're right, Councilman Klein. And we can't do it all. So, we're still sort of like this with a big funnel right now. It's going to have to get smaller, and then we're going to have to narrow our focus. And we're in the process of doing that now, working with the students. We anticipate when we come back in February, we'll have that narrowed down. But if you have input now about some of these other ideas, we'd like to hear it, and that's why we want to give you the full picture.
Again, but all we're going to do tonight is that recommendation that is the 30,000. And then I think, during the next year, as you said, we'll begin to hopefully develop and implement that drop-in center as well. But there are certainly, there are lots of needs in our community that we haven't met yet. Gail.
Thank you for everyone participating, and thank you for this information. Now, on the staff report, I mean, clearly the hire on an hourly basis a person to develop and maintain calendar is one. The second item, as I see here under the recommendation, is to confirm the request that you develop and implement an evening drop-in program, which will have some of the activities that are listed in more detail later in the staff report. So are you seeking, I mean, the way this staff report reads, you're seeking preliminary review and tentative and approval of these two concepts? Right. And then with the understanding, as I'm understanding what you're describing, that you would come back later with a more detailed plan and program or recommendation for a plan for the utilization of the funds, kind of strategically developed, that would be phased, because you're not going to suddenly I don't know how you're planning to spend the money.
We don't know yet.
But that's my understanding, so that you'll be coming back with a more detailed plan regarding potential expenditure to support the items that you will continue to identify based on the survey findings.
That's right. So we intend to come back with an expenditure plan that is broader and more significant than what is right before you today. So there's two things really we're asking today. One thing is, we're sort of halfway through this outreach process, and we feel comfortable enough to at least get some of this money in circulation now in two ways. One, to have an hourly staff person support teen interns to develop and maintain a calendar of events. Very clear that was needed from the team. So I think we ought to do it, make that happen. The second thing that we can do right now is plan and design a fairly unstructured drop-in type program later evenings at the Newman Park Center that speaks to some of the themes that we've heard about in the survey focus group. That would be sort of low stress or de-stressing, low to no cost food, maybe some tutoring from Stanford students that was part of that program, but fairly unstructured. We think we have enough information to at least bite off that piece and go do those two things. As far as that second piece we're asking the committee about is some of the feedback, the bigger topics, whether transportation is one that sort of like we have questions about, or some of these other things that you start giving us feedback on some of the other themes now as
it does seem to me that clearly, once you have a person in charge of managing the broader calendar, that some of the items identified here already exist. Some do, some don't, based on my kind of understanding. And so the item, sort of as I see it then, we are basically, our possibility here is to recommend and to approve the recommendations in the staff report that go forward to full council for further deliberation.
Hopefully on consent, and then we can,
I think it
Get
will
them-
absolutely
yeah,
go
going,
through
yeah.
on consent and
right,
should go through quite quickly, I would imagine.
yeah, I hope
Yeah,
so.
I don't think there's going to be anyone who wouldn't support doing this, especially when the money is there.
Right,
It's that we don't have to allocate it, it exists.
right.
Karen?
Yes, thank you for the presentation and for your participation. Couple of questions. As for an hourly staff person, then on packet page 19, it talks about a temporary staff to implement the Click PA because it's currently in place but not funded. So I'm wondering if those two, is the Click PA part of what this $30,000 funding for a hourly staff person would be? Okay, and is that, does that mean that this hourly staff person would be a temporary position? I'm a little bit unclear on that.
We call it a temporary position because it's not a full-time benefit.
Okay.
If the program continues, we can keep them going.
Okay. Then, do you have any thought of how much of the $30,000 would go to a staff person as opposed to how much would go to programming?
The programming, less than 10,000 would go to the staff person. I would think that, I was running the numbers on what it would cost, and this is really for this fiscal year, for the next 6 months, say January through the end of June.
So 20,000 on an annual basis?
No, for the staff person would, be about $10,000 a year.
A year, okay,
$5,000 for 6 months.
okay.
Then, we might, and we don't have all of this worked out, but, for any kind of calendar program, you need to get the word out. You need to let people know that the calendar is there. You can do some type of campaign, it could be banners and other things. So to provide some funding to the students that are working on this calendar and that staff person, some discretionary money for marketing and promotion. So the thought is about $10,000 for the Click PA program and $20,000 for the drop-in Mitchell Park program that's defined in the staff.
Okay.
That's the 30,000.
And part of your comments led to my other question, which is also on 19, which talks about, and you mentioned this, many Palo, I think, actually, one of the presenters, I mentioned this, that many Palo teens are unaware of existing programs and services for teens. So what I wouldn't want to see is this new person going off in some other direction, but not also promoting the existing programs that we already have that people don't know about. So is there going to be a coordination of those, and why don't people, do we know from you all, why don't teens know about the existing programs?
The intent of the Click PA and the staff person is actually to let them know about existing programs.
Okay,
And if we add new programs, certainly they'll help with that, but it's more about existing programs. Because when we hear a lot about, things, even with this last event that we did over the weekend around, what was it, Aurora, the tree light. It's a great event, fun event. Would have been fun for a lot of teens, but there were some students there, but there were a lot of students that just didn't know about it. It's a good example. The hackathon was another one. It was a really terrific event downtown, and so many teens didn't know about it. So we're advertising and promoting in just a whole lot of different places, and I think that's part of how we want one simple, easy to access, social media sort of calendar that Palo teens can go to.
okay, and just one, you had something to say, it's not Max, is it your?
Yeah.
It is Max.
This is a-
No, I'm not.
Okay, all right, it's Max down here, okay.
Basically, the thing I've noticed with the calendar idea is
The microphone. You need to put that one closer to you.
the thing I've noticed with the calendar idea is basically the only I don't know anything about Palo Alto events personally, and it's not that I'm not interested in them; is I just don't get the information. The only information I know is Palo Alto online and stuff, and I don't check that site because there's nothing for me to check. I feel like if we have like, it'd be super simple, like a Facebook calendar, Google calendar, something that a lot of teens are on, and we combine like aspects from like the Teen Arts Council, the Teen Social Council, all like Palo Alto events that could be accessible to teens and would find fun, and we all channel them into one like unified calendar where it'd be posted specifically on those social sites. That would be very good because then I'll know about it because it'll appear on places that I'm at, because I don't feel like a lot of teens check like Palo Alto Online and calendars in that sort of way.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you.
Also, could I say something?
Sure.
I also find that that there are some like the school also announces many kind of programs as well, right? So you could also look to the school for a possible avenue of advertising these programs, but also that I'd say that most teens go to these kind of programs through word of mouth, right? So I think the important thing is trying to get someone to work with teens to make these programs and to get teens invested in them, so people are more likely to bring their friends. Like when things are more run by the city, there's less of an incentive to go to them because they're not really seen as cool or accessible than if it's run by one of your friends.
Okay, thank you all for that.
So, Larry.
Go ahead. Am I called on?
Yes, you're called on.
Okay. I think it would be helpful when this is referred to the full council that you break out how much would be paid to the new person as compared to what the rest of the money is being spent on. And it doesn't add up to 30,000 yet to me, but I'll hope to see more detailed numbers when you send it to council. A question on the survey that you've taken. I heard the number breakdown between Pally and Gunn and middle schools. Were any private school students included in the polls?
We did get some. We got some from Castellea, but the majority were public schools.
Yeah, no, I would have expected that, but I just wanted to make sure that the private schools were not excluded
They
from.
weren't excluded.
Okay. I'm not clear as to what our decision-making process is going to be here. As I'm looking at this, the numbers are that we have $217,000 in effect in the bank
Right.
to be used for something.
Right.
But that's sort of a one-time or.
Well, there was some ongoing that Rob spoke
Yes,
about.
yes, I was going to get that. We have 75,000 ongoing. So that we really have sort of two budgets in effect. One-time expenditures and ongoing 75 to pay for this part-time person we're talking about, and who knows what other staff or other programs. But so that's the boundary of our expenditures for this, which is why I sort of got talking about.
Bowling alley, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Where's that money coming from? That
Right.
might be very nice, but
Okay.
how do you foresee the proposed uses of these two buckets of funds evolving? Who's going to do what, and when's it going to come, and so how do you see all that?
It's a good question, Councilman Klein. I don't think I have an answer to all of that yet, because we're sort of in the middle of this and sort of capturing as much feedback as we can from our partners that work with young people in Palo Alto and from students themselves. And we're really just sort of starting the process of filtering that information. So what criteria are we going to use for how do we spend down those funds? What ideas should we propose that make the most sense? And, some of the ideas that just outside of what the budget would even allow, they're likely going to fall to the side. Another filter might be, what idea is going to have the most impact in terms of going to impact the most students?
Sure.
Right? That would be one that we would do.
But I would suggest that maybe the first thing you need to do is develop a timeline, and what's the process going to be, since I don't know if any of you are seniors, but I wouldn't want to lose. You're a senior?
Max is a junior.
Well, I don't want to lose them, and if we don't get something done by May, you're going to have to recruit some new people.
I will, and when that happens all the time. with
Sure.
vaccines. But that's one of the reasons, Councilman Klein, we wanted to put something, in the works now, even though it's, like the program for Mitchell Park that would be construct, it's not completely defined yet. And so that's yet to be designed, but we want these seniors that are with us now to help us make
Okay,
that happen.
well, so I'm all for doing this, but I'm hopeful we can move faster.
I think what I'm hearing, though, is a work in progress.
Yeah.
You're giving us kind of a checkpoint here. You're saying we would like to hire somebody. You've included two very precise things. One is the calendar of what's going on and what's available. And the second, though, is the drop-in program.
Liz, you might want to pull the mic over by you.
Thank you. As I said, the second is to develop and get into the drop-in program. Let me ask a couple of other things. Cupertino has a particularly good drop-in center. Have you had a chance to take a look at it, any of you? If you ever have an opportunity, it's in their library and it's very well used. And I imagine other cities have that as well, but theirs is extremely well known. And their library is, I think, the most used library in the county system. But I think there's a big new opportunity here with the library opening.
Me too.
And I don't remember how much square footage there is there, but as I recall, it's a lot. And a wonderful opportunity.
I have one other question.
And the one other thing that I hope somebody will play on and develop, and that's, what was your first name? Fabian. Your idea that there be some place where teens could find jobs. And I think that probably doesn't exist, does it? And with social media, it seems like it would be relatively easy. There's a neighborhood thing where I am that looks for jobs, advertises jobs, and so forth. It's just it's a neighborhood or a Google kind of based thing, and it's very effective. So I hope you all will pursue that idea. I think that's a good one. You had something to add?
Yes. One item that you kept mentioning, which I can understand, but I worry about from a budgetary standpoint, is the provision of food or low-cost food, because I have a feeling that adds up pretty quickly to not trivial amounts of money.
Right.
So I wonder whether you really need to sort of carve that out as a discussion item or maybe come up with some numbers as to make clear to people what the trade-off is. If you're, anyway, I'm sure you have a good grasp as to how much.
Well, I do. I'm not sure how to deal with that either. We don't want to spend all this money on food necessarily. But
Right.
It's
No.
clearly an important fact for teens. If we have an event, if there's food there, it's going to be exponentially
Just
more
like
of the-
adults.
Yeah,
It doesn't
that-
make
that-
any
so-
difference.
But it just adds up, and we're not talking
know.
megabucks here.
Yep.
Gail, you had a comment?
Just a question, just a clarification question. So, should we assume or not that when you come back to the city council in this calendar year or early next calendar year, based on the recommendations before us, that at that time you will have a more detailed potential budget regarding expenditures for the remainder of the monies in this account? Or are you going to be scheduling a time later in 2014? I can't tell from what you've said, and this has been very informative, by the way. I'm very impressed. I've seen a lot of really good work over the last, year, and with the teen council and all these different groups. What is, again, the timeline? What is your plan to bring that back so we have a clear understanding and we can act on that?
So my plan is to come back to the Policy and Services Committee in February with a more detailed plan of further expenditure of these funds, and then get that to council as soon as possible thereafter. Yeah, because that plan isn't yet defined, does that mean it's going to be spending money still this fiscal year that we're going to ask for, or is it next fiscal year? That's yet to be determined.
Thank you. I wanted to get that clarification in terms of the February date and what we would expect, or the next group of policy and services will expect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
I think Jessica had something to say to you.
Oh, I was going to speak to the food item, which is that, from what I got from the 500 and something responses I had to scroll through, they're not necessarily, they do, of course we like free food, So that's an of course, that's a given. But I think one of the things people were saying is that if we were to have a drop-in center or a space where teens could go in the evening, they would be completely fine paying for food. But it seems that in the later evening, there aren't a lot of places open that are selling food, especially to teens who don't necessarily have a lot of money in downtown, and town and country tend to be quite expensive, especially the places that are open later in the evening. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge portion of the budget. We're not looking for anything like downtown. Like we want good food, but we don't need great food. So even something like selling hot chocolate and popcorn, both of which I think provide more profit than they actually do expense, especially if you make us buy small portions. Even stuff like that, people would be happy. It's just one of the major factors is the inconvenience of having to provide our own food when we try to go to places.
So one of the things we're looking at right away is talking to Ada's Cafe about
Yes,
the job.
yeah, that's what I would have thought
For
of
them to
too.
be open in those evening events,
Yes,
and they do a wonderful job, so.
There are also food trucks that
Yeah.
may be a possibility at some point as well.
That came up
Could
as well,
become very, very
especially
popular.
near Gun in the lunch period.
Right.
That I heard that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Do any of you want to add something to this? It's a pleasure to have you here, and I feel like we have such a wonderful resource.
I feel that for the food situation in the Mitchell Park place, I feel it's like very easy problem to solve. Like if we just have like a small like snack bar per se, where we sell like brownies for $1 and hot chocolate and like stuff for like $1, $2 to $5, whatever. I'd be fine with doing that. Like if I go and I'm hungry and I want like a drink and a small snack, it'll cost me $3, and that should not like cost a lot of money for the city or for the students. So I think that would be like good.
So maybe, again, looking at, as we just said, Ada's or one of the food trucks or something like that, where it's much more reasonable. Any of the rest of you want to add to it? Good.
On the food.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your taking time. I understand you get lots of homework, so you've had to give up an hour or two to come down and spend it with us tonight. I really appreciate it. So we'll look forward to the next phase, and I think the next thing you'll be looking at, Rob, is the 30,000 that'll be available to begin hiring somebody.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this committee needs to recommend it.
Yeah, please, thank you. Thanks. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Good. So it will roll along, and it won't, oh, sorry. And it should not take long. Sorry, Karen.
Just for a moment, if colleagues wanted to ask for, when this comes to council, that it does provide the delineation that both of us spoke to about how much for staff, how much for programming, and then maybe identify also, number 2 here only talks about the evening drop-in program at the New Mitchell Park Community Center. I agree with Councilmember Klein. It looks like, it's more money than is needed just to do that. So if there's anything you might amplify number 2 with, would be most helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that'd be very helpful.
And I'm sure somebody's also going to say, there's the new library, but there are probably other centers where this could go on as well. I'm sure there's one at Palo and perhaps at Jordan. Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate your coming. So to take us back to our agenda, the city auditor, the auditor we're going to talk with tonight, had to go next door to finance for a few minutes, and he'll be back. So we'll continue on with 3 and 4. Number 3 is the ordinance for electric vehicles. Do we have staff? Peter, is that you? Good, welcome. How are you?
Very good. Good evening.
Thank you. And this, just to kick us off on this was a request regarding having, or how would we ascertain that electric vehicle outlets would be in private homes? And so this is our ordinance that deals with that, and we'll primarily talk about not how you actually supply it, but you make it possible to install it.
That's correct. Thank you, and tonight we also have Jessica and Albert, staff, Homer from our building department, Rich here, Sheila also from utilities. So in case you have any technical questions, between myself and staff, we'll be sure to answer them. So essentially, taking on City Council's direction, this was the direction verbatim from the action items that was received from the city clerk's office. You've heard these loud and clear. We're on track to deal with all of them. Today, we are bringing before you the requirement to require all new single-family residential housing to install the necessary circuitry for EV chargers. But as you can see, there were 8 separate requirements. And we will be addressing each of those. So staff's recommendation going forward to the city council with your approval would be to make the appropriate findings to require that all new construction of single-family homes have the necessary circuitry for EV chargers. Without getting into what that means, what we've done is made the point of entry very easy, eliminated all the barriers, identified the costs, and identified a route that would make it easy for someone with a variety of different types of electric cars to put in the last few steps necessary to plug in their electric vehicle, minimizing the amount of effort and cost up front. So essentially, that means that a house will be equipped with one utility box, essentially ready and equipped for a person to put a receptacle in to charge their vehicle.
Peter, you did say you would talk about the cost, right, at some
Yes.
point?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we can jump into that right now before I go into the next piece. But essentially, that is nominal for the property owner. We're talking about somewhere in the magnitude of $500, which would pay for the conduit, the utility box, and the panel capacity to install the necessary circuitry on the electric panel. And we vetted this number through ECAG, various other installers and suppliers. So it's a nominal cost of entry.
Good, thank you.
Essentially coming back for your consideration sometime early next year, we will get into the variety of other issues you wanted us to deal with. We are actively engaged on a bi-weekly meeting with utilities, public works, fire, planning, city attorney's office to talk about how we might address issues such as how do we require it for non-residential, for existing construction, for public right-of-way. So we will be coming back to you on those items. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
That's pretty straightforward, I would say.
Keep it simple.
Any questions from, yes, Karen?
Yeah, a couple of clarifying questions in the, well, 2. $500, I mean, all we're talking about here is really adding like a 240 amp outlet. So I'm not quite sure why, oh, there's somebody waving his hand back there. Can't see you, okay. But it doesn't, but I'm not clear why it would be as much as $500. You don't have a microphone, do you need a microphone? What's the situation with microphones?
Hear me, I'm happy to use the microphone, but that's a conservative estimate. We're talking about if you choose to put the actual conduit in the wall, install it, the labor, the materials, the panel capacity, the breaker, if you want to put a breaker in, if you wanted to install the actual receptacle in the wall, could be up to $500, but we erred on the side of caution. It is not an exact number. It depends on how long you needed to run the raceway or the conduit. But conservatively speaking, $500, but it could be substantially less.
Okay, that's helpful. And part of the cost might be, well, most people's garages have, power to them anyway, so.
Not this type of power, but they
Yes, but
usually have
power, so there's
some type of power.
There is a raceway, as you're calling it.
So the raceway for this type of electric vehicle charging would be substantially larger than your typical 110 outlet because it requires a larger gauge wire. So that takes a special run of conduit to provide for that plug, if you will.
Okay. And I think I may have had a second question here, but maybe not. I think that was only my only question, though. Thanks.
What would be the typical cost of a retrofit to accomplish the same thing?
That would be substantially more. So typically with a retrofit, what you would need to do is pull out the drywall, install the conduit, potentially upgrade the panel. A lot of cases, the panels don't have the sufficient amperage to supply a 50 amp circuit, which would be necessary for a level 2 charger. So that would be upwards of $5,000 or more to upgrade the panel, get the proper permits, do the load calculations, etc. At least.
How many new residences do we have per year, roughly speaking?
New single-family residences?
Well, that's who this applies to, right?
Yes, correct. I don't have that number off the top of my head. There was one more addition, talking to Sven, who wasn't at our last EVSE task force meeting. For the purpose of eliminating one more additional step, Sven asked that I add 2 words to the language, which would be at the end of your ordinance, where it requires the panel capacity. We were just going to add the words "or receptacle."
Could you tell us specifically where that is?
Yes, I sure will. Put this down.
This is cabinet box or enclosure would say cabinet, comma, box, enclosure or receptacle.
So
A4 106.8, point A.
It would be changed into a listed cabinet, comma, box, comma, enclosure or
Who
receptacle.
is he? And he doesn't have a mic, and who is he?
Yeah, got it.
yes, thank you. All right. So
Is
yeah,
that right? Is
section
that-
A4 dash.
Peter, can you grab the mic?
Yeah.
We're recording.
Sure. Section A4.106.8, subsection A, the end of the second sentence would read, "The raceway shall terminate in close proximity to the proposed location of the charging system in a listed cabinet box, comma, enclosure, comma, or receptacle." So we'd add the 2 words.
Number of new residences. So, a couple of questions regarding other cities and so forth. Did you base your information on other cities and what they are doing so far?
We did base it on some research that we had gotten from other cities. Our city attorney looked at some other city ordinances. We also vetted it with the DCAG, the Development Center Advisory Group, as well as contractors.
And for the most part, did you discover that this is in the ballpark of what others would estimate this would cost?
The cost
Yeah, the cost.
with the cost, yeah, that's region-wide. So for the cost of the permit, the conduit, the installation, be roughly around $500. We're talking for this requirement, not for a retrofit, but for new construction.
Right. Okay, it seems like a lot. And maybe it's just part of the doing business. And did you find a number of other cities have this as a requirement?
Albert, what other cities did we have?
Sure. The city of Sunnyvale has a requirement that's similar to this. I believe it's a 40 ampere circuit instead of 50. City of Los Angeles has a requirement that it applies to a wider range of buildings, and it also offers options to install just the raceway or to install the outlet itself. Oh, sorry, Albert Yang, Deputy City Attorney.
So overall, we're kind of on the edge here, aren't we? This is something new for builders to deal with. If it's only in Sunnyvale though, where else is it?
And the code may be something, sorry, Sven Thiessen. I'm an electric vehicle owner in Palo Alto, living in Palo Alto, who's built a house wired this way. I ran PG&E's electric vehicle department, and I installed the nation's first curbside electric vehicle charger, so you can go charge your electric car in front of my house for free, anytime. 314 Stanford Avenue. Yeah, and we have people give us bottles of wine. It's great. What you're doing is essentially, this proposal is good and only somewhat cutting edge. It's good because it offers flexibility that other cities don't, in that they're requiring is to install conduit or raceway, which is the hollow plastic pipe where you run the wiring. And that way it's actually a little bit more expensive because you're running empty plastic tubing to which the homeowner will say, oh, I have a Tesla and want to charge it very quickly, reasonably quickly, that isn't going to annoy Shiva at the utility, okay? Or I have a Leaf which doesn't actually take that much electricity, to end up with something that simply looks like this. It's the charger, have you ever seen the back of a dryer outlet? It's a bigger plug than your standard 110 right here.
We've just eliminated whatever.
Oh, was? Okay.
They wanted you to choose a network.
There we go. That is my my kindergarten friend, aged young man Liam, charging a car. And when you have 10 electric car drivers on how you should write this ordinance, you have 12 opinions. So Peter has done a really good job of maximizing flexibility in deciding this. However, it's going to cost a little bit more than Sunnyvale's because we're maximizing flexibility by running raceway, which is a hollow plastic pipe, so that the Tesla owner can run that 100 amp wire versus me, the Leaf owner, that only wants to run 40 or 50 or 60 amp wire. In Sunnyvale and other places, what they're doing is saying, just run the wire through the wall. And that means when the Tesla owner wants to upgrade or someone else wants to upgrade, they do have to bust out the sheetrock and then put the sheetrock back in. Here, all we have to do is pull that lower amperage wire out and install the higher amperage wire. What's interesting is if you poll the EV drivers in general, the early adopter EV drivers, they would say that this is, and I'm going to use this word, wussy. This is weak. If we want to be a cutting edge city for electric vehicles, we'd require 2 places to charge in the garage, because it'd be 1 per parking space. So because we can have more than up to 2 garages / cover parking spots in Palo Alto per new residential families. So we'd require each one to have a charger if we really wanted to be cutting edge. But this is a good sort of in between, but you can't say you're really cutting edge. Okay, they would argue that you're not. No, yeah, but they would send them saying that's no. But you talk about it costing $500. The reason why it costs $500 is because you're actually having to run not the wires itself. So in other words, if you bust open this wall right here at this outlet, you'd see between the studs just naked wire. We're requiring that you run the plastic hollow pipe, so that in the future, if you want to upgrade, it's very easy to upgrade. So this is why this costs more than some other cities would do. But there's been a number of articles about this proposal, and someone said in Palo Alto, when you build a house, this addition is akin to buying a doormat. A doormat. So, because in terms of the cost of the house, it is not much. So they've done a good job there.
Good explanation. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from our group? Pardon me? Oh, no, we're keeping the phone.
Cost of doing business.
Presentation.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
Okay, is there any discussion about the staff recommendation? Larry?
The reason I asked the question is how many houses are built per year, because I know the number is relatively low. So this goes to the idea that this is really an experiment, and how cutting edge is, I don't really, I'm not interested in that. But what I am interested in is getting this moving, and we will have an experiment of whatever it is, 100, 200 houses a year. And who knows, you might be back in 2 years to have a more aggressive approach. The second line, I don't know what it would be. No, I don't know. I'm not going to be here, Sven.
That's very interesting you say that, in that
Okay, so
next year, you sell your house, you have to put a charger.
thanks, Sven. I think
You and I can talk about that one, Sven.
So
That's
to-
all I have to say.
I just wanted to commend the proponents of this proposal and the staff for moving us along. I think we do need to all congratulate each other that we moved this at an incredibly fast pace relative to when some great ideas come to us and when we get to the point of having an ordinance before us. And I am very impressed by that, and I appreciate everyone's work, and I think this is terrific. I look forward to the additional items that will be coming forward to us.
So with that, all those in favor? Aye. I just have one question, Peter. We have 2 charging stations down here at Overland. Do we have any regulations regarding using those?
I'll pass it on to Jessica.
Jessica.
Some cars are there quite a long time.
Yeah, so technically they're not supposed to be there longer than 3 hours, which, yeah, we have actually had Jessica Sullivan, parking manager. So we've had a number of inquiries lately on some folks who appear to be using them longer than 3 hours. They are supposed to be ticketed for that.
I think we should actually move ahead and do that ticketing, because I've noticed a couple of times cars have been there a good part of the day, and it becomes a parking place then instead of an EV charging station.
Yep, noted.
There's, rather than expending a lot of energy. Sven Thiessen, EV driver. Who else drives an EV here? No, because the people who use the cars use those parking spaces, and you're giving away free electricity right now. So I think the Molly Stone approach in front of our, we've got one on California Avenue of a charge spot, free for the first hour, and then it's very expensive to charge after that. So your first hour is free, and then you're going to bear a significant penalty. Your home charger charges at say 10 cents a kilowatt hour. This charges at 50 cents a kilowatt hour. So you'll take your first hour free, and if it's an emergency, then you will charge there. And those chargers are smart enough to do that. Right now,
That's what we needed to know, great.
and the service provider, Coulomb, ChargePoint, can do that for you. And they'll be happy, because they'll make more money.
Good. Can you come back to us with that information?
I
Tell us
can,
how we can do it.
Sheila can pass that along. So we're talking parking enforcement. We'll ask, yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I like the idea of making money.
Just gonna send it
out
to
of
the police.
That's a very good idea.
Okay, all right, good.
Thank you, Peter, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sven, for jumping in as staff on that one. And so let's, again, back to our agenda, and we're on number 4 until, have we seen the auditor come back in?
Yeah, thanks, yeah, we're good.
I think this one is going to be relatively quick. So number 4, recommendation to adopt an ordinance for penalties and expired permit enforcement for residential projects. This came up recently at a meeting, and there was a lot of discussion about this, in particular one house in the Southgate neighborhood that a former council member said had been like that for over 10 years. So this puts forth tonight a way for these penalties to go into place. And is there staff that's going to?
That's myself. It's the Peter Show, huh? All right. Again, this item came before the council the same night, and tonight on this item we'll have myself, Albert, and Homer. in case you have any questions regarding the technical aspects. This is pretty straightforward. This was the council direction. Essentially, we were asked to come back with an ordinance amending the municipal code requiring new construction, residential construction projects to have time limitations and strict enforcement with penalties and fines to ensure that it doesn't exceed the maximum life of the building permit. We went back and discussed this with legal staff as well as our chief building official and have come before you tonight to make a recommendation. Staff's recommendation is in your report, but just to summarize, the ordinance is focused on residential projects, residential building permits. The ordinance imposes strict penalties for failure to maintain an active permit, and it allows the chief building official to actually require a fence to be installed around the property in the event that they do not comply and close out the permit to ensure that there isn't a blight or a visual impact to the public right-of-way. And so essentially, the council asked that I come back with what is the impact on the non-residential side if we're talking commercial projects. So I looked through our database and found a total of 11 permits that have expired since 2003 for commercial buildings. So of those, none of them have come before me that they were imposing some kind of visual implication or negative blight issues. So essentially, it's not a commercial problem, the expired permit. It's really more, on occasion, very rarely, a residential problem. The property values are just way too high. This is the California Building Code requirement. Building permits expire in 180 days. That's plain and simple. That's what we currently enforce. This new language would have a list of penalties that are tiered from 0 to 30, 31 through 60, 61 to 120, and 121 and above. And if you would like, we can pass the mic to Albert. He can get into the details of this, or we can save that unless there's any questions.
I'm going to do it a sort of backwards way. How close is the auditor? Right there. Oh, good, good. In that case, then, why don't we just have you do a quick summary of this, and then have the auditor jump in, because that's our last item.
Sure. Albert Yang, Deputy City Attorney. So this is a graduated penalty schedule, which is fairly similar to the other jurisdictions that we looked at that have similar ordinances. The major difference between the ordinance, the draft that's before you, and the ordinances in other jurisdictions is we chose not to have a schedule of hard and fast time limits depending on the size or estimated valuation of a project. Staff felt that that was too much of a one-size-fits-all approach because individual projects, depending on where they're sited or how complex they are, might take longer, or it might not actually cause a visual blight or a problem for neighbors for it to take a little bit longer. So this approach is a little bit more flexible in that regard.
Well, I'm so very much in favor of this, but as I read the ordinance, it seems like it's not a little bit more flexible. I don't know what the criteria is here. It's like, if you look at under 105.5, second paragraph, it says the chief building official is authorized to grant in writing one or more extensions, unexpired permits, or periods of not more than 180 days. That's 6 months, and if you could give, a number of those, you could go on for years. So I'm not sure how that provides any improvement. And then it says, extension shall be requested in writing and justifiable cause demonstrated. No examples of what justifiable cause is. You go to the next paragraph and it says the chief building official is authorized to grant in writing one or more renewals of the expired permits and may require, and then, so there's that. And then you go to the next page, 1661030, penalty for expired permits. C, it says the chief building official may reduce or waive a penalty accrued, and the delay was, the reason number one was the delay was attributable to circumstances beyond the property owner's control. can we have a such as? Because, you know, I just don't know what any of this means. It sounds like it's totally discretionary, and if I come to you and say, you know, I'm distraught because my dog got run over, I mean, I'm not really trying to be flip there, but it's just, there's no context for this, no rationale, so to me it just seems way open-ended, and anybody could come in and plead any kind of case, and what would be the basis for approving, and what would be the basis for denying? But I'm especially troubled by that first part, because it looks like this could just go on for years, and we aren't any better off than we are now.
Well, we purposely kept it open because there are so many different varieties of permits. Permits that only exist on the interior of a building, permits for work that it will never be seen by the public right away, and the life cycle of a construction project can potentially have its fits and starts, and so we wanted to leave some discretion for the chief building official to make a decision on whether the construction is moving forward at a reasonable pace or not, and if it's impacting the public right away and the neighbors or not. And so based on those considerations, we could impose the fees and fines and penalties as described. But there's so many different varieties of construction types, we wouldn't be able to describe all the different options.
Well, it seems like, though, just even based on what you said, there could be examples. So if the work is all interior, and so a project hasn't been signed off, but the work is interior, it does not affect the public right-of-way, you know, there's kind of no harm, no foul, maybe some noise issues, maybe not. But so that could be an example that's provided here. I am sorry, but I just don't see any kind of teeth to this at all, any kind of example, any basis for not extending a permit. So as Alyssa, you're looking at this like, you know, upside down. It's, I'm so much in favor of this, but I don't know why we're bothering if I just read this ordinance. Having said that, the one thing that I really, really do applaud you for is 1661.050 is the construction of the fence, and making sure that's also consistent with 1624, which I think is the fence ordinance. I presume that, but I don't know what we're doing. Last question I have is, and Albert, you will fix this for me, or clarify this for me, is Section 1, findings and declarations. That language surely applies to this, but if I just read this as a non-attorney, I don't see that language as being relevant to this ordinance. So you, the attorney, will help me with that, I'm sure.
That is language that's in there kind of in an abundance of caution, because we are amending state building code in part with this ordinance, and we are required to make local findings. That's primarily the reason that that's in there.
Maybe we can address the 180 days and what justification we use to expire a permit. I'll have our chief building official talk a little bit about that, if that would help.
Good evening. Homer Mayel, I'm acting chief building official. On 180 days, that has been in the code for a very long time, as long as I can remember. The first 180 days is from the time the permit is issued, 180 days before the first inspection. One inspection has to be done before 180 days is expired. Normally, when 180 days is gone, they come back for a second 180 days. And that's kind of easy to give away. But the third one, which the code allows it, we do ask for justification, and we have to have something in writing from them. In the past few years, when I was in San Jose and other cities, they expanded that 180 days, some cities to a total of 720 days because of economic hardship that a lot of people had. But 180 days, normally when they go in this third 180 days, we don't give it away that easily. They have to have good reason, justified reason, and then we let them have the third 180 days. But it is one of those things that our inspectors have to make sure that they don't go beyond 180 days. As long as they have an inspection, justifiable inspection within 180 days, they can go on. But they cannot go on forever. They cannot just say, we just installed a tile here, could you inspect that so we can beat 180 days? That's not the case. In the building code, there are certain inspections that are spelled out, that they have to call us for those inspections. So they cannot put a lobby a toilet and call us. They said, inspect this one, and then in 180 days, I'll call you for a sink. And next 179 days later, I'll call you for another thing. So that doesn't work that way. They have to call us for those inspections that we have in the code spelled out.
So the words that you used were good reason and justifiable reason, and I'm still, so.
We can come back
I've
with.
I've stated my concern and my issue, because I just don't see, I like the penalties, yes. Other question I do have about this is the penalties. If they don't pay, if it's in a hardship situation, do we put a lien on the property, or what do we do with that? That's the other piece of this, I guess, that's unclear for me.
So there is a section of the ordinance that declares an expired permit to be a public nuisance, and that would permit the city to then place a lien on the property.
I didn't read that in here. Is that, did I overlook it?
That is section 1661060, and it makes reference to the public nuisance chapter of the code, and the procedure for getting a lien is spelled out more fully in the public nuisance chapter.
Okay, so I didn't read it in here because I didn't know what I was reading. Okay, thank you. But those are my my concerns of looking for some kind of clarity and some kind of actual enforcement here.
Let me just ask a follow-up to that. How often do you get somebody calling in to complain about a project that isn't done? Is it frequent?
You mean to extend 180?
No, the complaints. How, not the person not the person who got the permit, the next door neighbor or someone across the street. How often do you hear complaints saying they've had their permit for too long, or there's a hole in the ground?
I have been here for a little longer than a year. I can probably count those occasions on one hand, or even less. There hasn't been that many of them, no.
So I guess my other comment would be, Karen, if it's not rampant, that I'm not as concerned about whether or not we've got something to put into place. I'm going to presume that you'll use this judiciously and when necessary.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound as though it's often a problem.
It hasn't been so far, no.
Well, if I might just respond to that, we don't have a proliferation of these around town. It's just the cause of the ordinance of our colleagues' memo was because there are enough of them around town, a small handful of them around town, but they've been such ongoing problems. So I thought that's what we were trying to address here. It's not the proliferation of them. It's that they go on for so long. And how does this help us?
Well, I'm hoping this helps us, and the only one I can think of right offhand is the one that Gail Willie brought forward, which was 10 years, and I have to believe that it looks as though we already had something in place, so I'm a little surprised that was allowed to go on for that long anyway.
So the one comment I would make was what we had in place was something that expired the building permit, but there was no consequence for having an expired building permit. So here we've tried to put in place, that consequence. I think in general, the balance we were trying to strike was between encouraging the project proponent to complete the project and making that possible, and also having an incentive to do it quickly and on time. But that said, we can certainly look at amendments that put more clarity to the ordinance.
Yes, thank you. What prompted this were two particularly egregious cases. One on Maybell, right near Wannabriani's Park, and the other site is the one in Southgate. I feel that this is a very good effort at this moment. It does provide penalties, which in the past did not exist, so there was no incentive for someone to actually move forward and finish up the residential project. It resulted in two properties which had blight qualities, and the reason this really came forward is that neighbors continue to express concern to the city, and over 6 to 8 years, and nothing appeared to happen that was very effective. So I'm certainly comfortable with what we have before us, and perhaps we can look at this again in 6 months or a year and determine if, in fact, this is producing the outcomes we want. because those particular egregious sites have been, there have been considerable improvements. I've seen both of them, and I appreciate the staff work that's gone into that. But I'm comfortable with what I see, but I would say that maybe we need to look at this in a year and to see if there are other improvements that would be desirable.
Larry?
I had the same question that Karen did, and thank you. So let me just sort of amplify on them and make one suggestion. First on the penalties. These penalties get to be unexpired permits, like the situation we have in Southgate. They amount at the top to $480,000 a year. $800 a day, $24,000 a month, $480,000 a year. So after a year, almost anybody in that situation is probably out of business in one way or another. So if you take the situation in Southgate and assume that it's been 10 years, and if the fees had been penalties had been in effect, that the owner would now owe the city like $5 million. Obviously, that's no longer a penalty. So my question is, at what point would the city step in and say, you now have, we don't have to rely anymore on the public nuisance, or at least I'm hopeful we don't have to rely on public nuisance theory. Is there some point where we can say, this place owes so much money that we're now going to be able to foreclose on it and sell the house or the property for whatever we can, collect the city's penalties and pay off whoever else is owed money on the project?
So in my experience dealing with these kind of things, working with the city attorney's office, it gets to the point where you kind of draw the line, you put a stop work order on the project, you file with the court an order to ensure that all work gets permits, and I mean essentially you've got a restriction on the deed before anything can happen, before the property can sell. Again, this is a motivation to move forward, not necessarily a motivation to be a revenue generator, but.
No, I'm not interested in.
From Albert.
Revenue is not a concern here. We're assuming that there are only going to be one or two cases like this a year. What's far more important to our citizens is that something be done, that we don't have a situation like we have in Southgate where the house is partially completed and it's been partially completed for 10 years and nothing's happening. So I wonder whether we can't build, and here I have my two suggestions. Can't we build in something that says if the fines, or penalties, excuse me, get to a certain dollar level, then city staff will move, no more discretion, you will move at pick your number, at the 50,000, 100,000 level or whatever, so that our citizens can have some certainty that a project like the one in Southgate isn't going to sit there forever.
Well, I think that there would be certainly challenges to trying to force someone to complete a project beyond what we can do in imposing penalties. The hammer that we have is placing a lien on the property under this ordinance.
So you're telling me that like in the Southgate situation, we don't have much, we can't get the court to order the property be sold?
I have to look into that further, but I don't believe so.
And that's really our ultimate weapon. So I'd really like to know the answers to that. Just seeing penalties accrue, that doesn't do much for me. It would in the situation where you have people of goodwill, but every once in a while, like in Southgate, we have somebody, for whatever the reasons, are not acting with goodwill.
Right. Same owner.
Hmm?
Same owner.
As Maybell, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, what?
I'm just quoting my colleague.
That's it. That's intriguing. I don't know what. But the second point,
It says it's a habit.
some habit. let me suggest this as a fix on these extensions, because I totally agree with what Karen had to say. What if we said that the city building official can grant no more than 3 extensions of 180 days, and if the landowner wants an additional extension, it has to come to the city council?
That's the direction of the council. I don't see why we can't do that.
May I add something?
Sure.
Another motivation, in addition to financial penalty, another motivation for citizens to continue with construction and not letting permit to expire is when the permit expires and at that time it happens to be a new code and the building was being built under the old code, then they have to comply with the new code, and that could be very costly to them. So that's another reason that they don't want to stop construction and continue on. Don't let the permit expire, because compliance with the usually newer codes are more restrictive and stringent than older codes.
I appreciate all that, but I think what I'm suggesting, that my idea is, if you have 3 possible extensions that you can grant, they have the original 180 days, so we're up to 2 years. And I think if somebody wants an extension beyond 2 years, that's pretty unusual.
It is unusual.
So our bigger hammer is that that person has to persuade at least 5 city council members, not just 1 building official.
So far, I have not seen anything more than 2 extensions.
Yeah, well, then this shouldn't be a problem.
So we'll add that language if that's the direction.
You comfortable? Yep.
Fine.
Okay, I had one question, and it is, in the staff report on page 57, really the top paragraph, the last sentence, city staff will provide an update and analysis of delays in commercial construction projects in Palo Alto if similar issues have arisen, along with potential solutions. I don't think we've had that, and this ordinance, wouldn't this ordinance apply to both commercial and residential projects?
No, it would only apply to residential because there isn't a problem that exists in commercial.
Sorry?
This problem doesn't exist in commercial.
Why not?
It just doesn't exist in Palo Alto. I mean, we did we looked back back to 2003 and only found 11 permits that had expired in that time. None of them posed a nuisance that we have record of.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that?
Uh-huh.
I can't swear to this, but I thought there were several people who were complaining, maybe not to the building department, about 195 Page Mill because it was stopping and starting. And I mean, I could be wrong, but I thought that was an example of, a real derelict site. And maybe it was a little bit different of an issue.
Yeah,
Maybe.
very different. That was stuck in litigation. They had to stop because they got too close to a PG&E pipeline. They had all kinds of problems, and then they ran into a new code cycle and had to redo their entire plans to comply with the new codes. So that's not a project that would be that this ordinance would force to move forward. That was to circumstance that was beyond even the property owner's control.
Okay, everyone, I think if you're comfortable with this, let's make a motion on it and move on, because I know our auditor is waiting to talk with us. Could I have a motion?
Move the ordinance, move the proposed ordinance with the change to say that the chief building official can only grant 3 extensions, and anything beyond that has to come to the council.
I'll second with. Do you want to speak?
Go ahead.
I'll second that. Just a couple of clarifications. So that goes on the second full paragraph, so that would be no more than 3 extension granted. What about the third paragraph there? Are we doing that also there?
No, I don't think it's necessary there, because because the payment of the late fee, well, it doesn't hurt that. It's just trickier to do when you're talking about somebody who's totally out of sync think it's necessary to put it in there so that somebody doesn't get out of sync, out of permit for one day and pay just a nominal fee and think you can just go to the chief building.
Okay, and then the other clarification is on, that I brought up previously as 166103.0C, is that the chief building official may reduce or waive a penalty accrued in the day was attributable to circumstances beyond the property owner's control. I don't have language on how to fix that, and I looked to the lawyer on our committee here to see if you have any thoughts.
Bring that up.
And then while you're thinking about that, you also had comments about maybe when this goes to council, that there be some clarification provided about, you know, can we then, after the penalties get up to a certain dollar amount, can the city then?
Yeah, I think Albert's going to take a further look at that.
Yeah, so if you can bring that forward to the council too. You know what we're talking about the, I've forgotten what the language was, but about, you know.
Yes, whether the city could
over-
force the sale of the property.
Yeah, force the sale of the property, yeah, so add that to the motion as well.
I would suggest in C that we add a proviso at the end that says, provided, however, that the waiver of any penalty in excess of $10,000 shall require the approval of the city council.
Okay, I accept that. Good idea.
Have we ever had that happen?
We never had the fees in place.
That's right.
Do we know that we ever would have had something like that happen?
Very rarely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's there now, I guess. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And thank you very much, and come on up, Mr. City Auditor. So our last item tonight is dealing with the city audit and a quarterly report and a revised work plan for the next year. Welcome, it's Human, right? Human, thank you. Welcome.
Human Muslim Acting City Auditor. So I would like to.
Let's give you a mic, okay? We'll do that and turn your mic on, and there you go.
I'd like to present tonight our quarterly report as of September 30th, 2013, and the revised fiscal year 2014 work plan, and request your review and recommendation to City Council acceptance. Just to briefly review the quarterly report, we have, starting on page 2, a summary of our audit work, which is in our fiscal year 14 work plan, and I won't read it all to you. There are summaries and of our other monitoring and administrative assignments, in addition to a page on the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline administration cases. Then on page 6, you will find a revised fiscal year 2014 work plan that we've put together considering our staffing and some priorities that have come up since the last work plan was presented. And finally, on page 7, I'd like to bring to your attention what I've labeled as an audit horizon. And these are audits mostly that this committee brought to the attention of our office as areas where you requested that we consider looking at. I've summarized these areas that you have brought to our attention, and this is an opportunity for the committee to decide whether you feel that we should prioritize any of these in our current fiscal year 14 work plan or in the fiscal year 15 work plan. As you know, we have our own risk assessment process that results in selection of audits, and this is where the committee can request us to either replace or add one.
Are you telling us at this point that in your audit horizon that these can all be accomplished in 2014?
No, they cannot.
That's what I was
They
thinking.
cannot.
Okay, good.
So
So you want us to pick and choose?
if you feel that you would like to do so, otherwise
you will.
Otherwise,
You will
otherwise we
based
have
on
a
your-
we
on
have
your
a
risk
fis-
assessment
we have
process.
an existing fiscal year 14 work plan that's based on our risk assessment and the hours that we budget, and we will proceed with our work plan.
I have a question here on the audit horizon, the ones that you have put there as identified but not really feasible unless we do trades or switches or we talk about that. So the clarifying question is, under the ones on packet page 14, under audit horizon, the degree of risk that we face per these items, in your judgment, you're suggesting it's not sufficient enough to do some trading or modification of the work plan, that the work plan itself, the revised fiscal year work plan, includes the ones that have the most risk or they're the most sensitive and need to be dealt with in a very timely fashion?
To the best of our knowledge, that is correct.
Questions? Karen, any questions?
I apologize, I had to step out for just a minute. The ones on page 14, what action are you looking for on those?
The audit horizon.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, attachment A, yeah.
Yes.
Those, as I explained, were audits that were
Mhm.
areas that this committee brought to our attention, as
Mhm.
areas of interest that
Mhm.
you requested we consider. And what we've tried to do is summarize succinctly what the concerns were from this committee. And we have spoken with departmental staff and, feel that these can be accomplished. However, we are presenting them for you to make the decision if you wish to direct us to either substitute one of our fiscal year 14 audits with one of these, or to add one of these or more to our fiscal year 15 audit plan. Otherwise, we will proceed with our risk-based audit plan.
And so what you're saying is that you have no room more, because you've done your work plan here, so you have no more room to take on another one, is that correct?
That is correct. We would have to substitute one of them for one or more of these.
And the ones that you have on your work plan are based on at least existing evidence or known evidence that these are the higher risk items?
That is correct.
Okay. Then I had one question on, where is it? Oh, yes. Page 10, the contract oversight, trenching, and installation of electric substructure. It says that this is going to the council consent. Is that because it was unanimous vote at finance, or why is that?
That is correct. We
Okay.
presented that audit, and there was a unanimous vote to accept the audit.
Okay, all right. I think those are my questions. So you'll keep attachment A, you'll keep that,
Yes.
and you'll keep record of that, and unless something changes, you will add this to the 2015 work plan?
So the plan, the idea would be that the city auditor, whoever it should be at that time, would include these as part of the risk assessment model that we would have, that it would feed into that risk assessment model, and they would be considered, again, unless this committee requests us to include one of these in the work plan.
So if
Okay.
I'm correct, these have come up from time to time, but they didn't jump into your risk assessment categories that are
That is
listed previously.
That is
But
correct.
if we feel really strongly about one of these 5, we can say, get rid of this and substitute that. Yes, if we wish to. So that's your option, if anyone feels that one of these is absolutely critical. If not, we'll have a motion and we'll leave.
Move approval.
Second. Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much. and
Yeah,
sorry
thank you.
to keep waiting.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Unless there's something else, maybe Sheila, you want to go over what we have to do for December and so forth?
Yeah, I think we have 3 remaining items for the December 10th meeting. We'll be coming here with a recommendation on a state lobbyist. and renaming main library, which is a council reform, as well as the board and commission application process, which was heard by committee earlier this year. We'll be coming back with some revisions on that.
Okay, and the meeting is on December 10th.
That's correct.
And unless somebody has something to add, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks. I think finally they got me the, no, not quite.
Track someone down. I'm
I've been
sorry.
there.
Where?
This is one of the reasons why I keep saying this room needs to go.
Yeah, that's